Hi, I'm Deerhart with The Agenda, and today is our first webcast of My Shameless Life. Today we have Scott Wiener that's gracious to come share his story with me. And I just wanted to start out with a connection with you about the idea of a fishbowl. I grew up as a minister's kid, and everything that I did, the family was on display. We were in this container that everyone was looking at and projecting on us a particular idea about who we were. So I figured that you might have a lot to share about that.
I do, yeah. It's in politics, you're definitely in a fishbowl, and I think especially in San Francisco local politics, everyone's passionate about our city and our community and our neighborhoods, and so when you're in local elected office here, people watch every move you make, people judge every move you make. Especially when you're 6'7", like I am, you do not blend into the crowd, and so there's definitely a lot of watching, a lot of judgment, and it can be challenging. But that's what I chose to run for office, and so that's the life I chose.
Yeah, and being 6'7" is a completely different perspective, very not so common perspective.
Yeah, it's one of my colleagues on the Board of Supervisors commented to me once that it was unfair that I could walk into an event and just walk back and forth through the event and everyone would know I was there, whereas she had to sort of jump up and down and try to get noticed. So there are definitely advantages to being tall. I do occasionally hit my head on things, so that's, I guess, the disadvantage.
I'm the guy that's I'm 5'8" 3/4", so I'm the guy that's jumping behind everyone to try to see everything. But I specifically want to talk about fishbowl, being gay, and it took me a very long time to come out of the closet. I came out when I was about 30, I'm 36 now, so in a lot of ways I feel like I'm an adolescent, and the ministry and the family that I was in the South, it was just this thing that I just took years and years and years and years to come to, and I was married to a woman for a while, so there was an increasing amount of pressure on me to be like her friend and to not choose myself. And I'm curious about your own coming out, because I read that you had come out when you were 17, and I often would look at people and there was this part of me all those years that even though I was living a particular version of myself that was partially true, I knew inside that something wasn't authentic and right, and I was envious of people that had come out when they were earlier, and I thought, I was exploring my sexuality as under secrecy and, confusion, and I would look at people that had come out of the closet when they were in their teenage years, and I had this envious feeling about that. What was that like for you in the coming out process? Did you know early on, how?
Well, I think I had a sense when I was 12 or 13 when I remember I went to summer camp, and I remember there was another kid who was there who I just had a huge crush on, and I think I didn't really know at the time what that was, but I couldn't stop thinking about him, and that was sort of the beginning of my process. And then when I was 17 is when I admitted to myself that I was gay, and that's when I started trying to find pictures of cute guys, and if anyone remembers some of those catalogs that we would get in the mail.
Totally.
What was the one? There was that one, I can't remember what it's called, but and then it was when I was 20 that I started actually coming out, and I was really lucky because my family it was like crawling with gay people. My aunt, my mother's sister, came out as a lesbian in the 1960s when it was still classified as a mental illness. And then my cousin on my father's side, she came out in the 70s. And so they were always around, and their girlfriends were always around. And then my mom, one of her cousins, was trans and transitioned when I was a teenager. So it was the kind of family where LGBT people were always around, but it was still hard. Still always hard to tell your parents, and even after I started coming out when I was 20, it took me almost a year to tell my parents, even with all that support.
What was that struggle like? I mean, what was the dialogue like? I mean, for instance, to offer only my own story, I had this that can't be true, but I think it is truly going on all the time. That can't be true because of this, and like trying to find proof that it wasn't. And you mentioned the catalogs even. I mean, the degree of repression that I was in as a child, and I think I see a lot of too in our community from where I'm from in the South. And we would look at pictures that were in like the medical journal in the library, and anything we could get our hands on, which is like, it's not a very clear perspective when you're like reading about STIs and things right off as a child to like characterize who you are sexually. Did you have a struggle like that, or was it something that you just?
It was definitely a struggle. I mean, I think, and I feel really old saying this as a 46-year-old, that sort of kids today, there's kids who they come out when they're 13, 14, 15 years old. There's a GSA in their school. There are other gay kids. There's the internet and role models, and they just have access to so much information and role models. And it's more normalized. There's still plenty of kids who struggle in families that are really homophobic, of course, but it's just different than it was 30 years ago when I was in middle school and high school. I don't know what would have happened to me if I'd come out. I would have gotten the crap kicked out of me. There were no, other than the luck that I had that I had people in my family, in society at large, I didn't know about gay people. The only thing I heard as a teenager was that gay guys were dying of AIDS. That was the information that I had as a teenager. And so it was hard. And again, even after I came to terms with being gay and having lesbians and a trans person in my family, it still took me 3 years to start coming out, and it took me another year after that to tell my parents. So it's always hard, and it's gotten easier, which is good.
Do you feel like there are still parts of you that are still coming out of the closet?
I think being in public life, there's a strong incentive not to be open about, even if, obviously I'm very extraordinarily out gay man, but there's still a lot of incentives not to reveal anything about your personal life as an elected official, because people will maybe use it against you or make fun of you. And I decided after I took office, my first year in office, I was like, I'm not going to do any like dating apps. I'm not going to do anything to put myself out there because I'll be vulnerable and my enemies will attack me. And then I decided, screw it. I'm not getting any younger, and I'm not going to, let my life go by without being a normal person. And so I, started dating and started, using online dating apps, because that's how, for better or for worse, that's how people meet these days. It's been good. I think just being a normal person when you're in public life, I think people.
Are you allowed to do that?
You are allowed to do it. You are allowed, and I think people see it. I think people appreciate it.
I think I appreciate that perspective, and I think you actually hit on something that I find to be the center of why I'm even doing these webcasts and these stories, is that the vulnerability, like you are in a hyper-focused position, but I think we all do, have this particular concept that people are looking at me, I can't reveal about myself because I have to fit in, or I have to be accepted, or I have to have love, or whatever, and you're in a position where that's intensely focused on you. And that's one of the key reasons that I wanted to talk to you, because when people say, oh, it's so brave that you've come out of the closet, I think that is brave, but I also think you said the word vulnerability, which is the big thing. I think it is incredibly vulnerable to be like, here's who I am, I'm going to put this out there, and if I have a career, great. If I don't, it doesn't matter, because it hurts more to not be who I am and to actually live in a way that doesn't, that I have that struggle. So that's I really appreciate that about what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
And being open.
And if people are going to attack you for being who you are, so be it. And that's just life.
And that's the fear part. That's where maybe I do lose all my friends, or maybe I don't have a career where I thought I was going to go, and but then it's all different because after I put myself out there, and I learned this in my own storytelling events with my own story, like it did shift and change the direction and around how people saw me, but it's also led me to having this conversation with you, and I'm happy about that. So, but the vulnerability to express who you are is something that I think is really amazing, and I'm super happy to see that from a political position. And you're also doing that on multiple levels, like there's coming out of the closet and being openly gay, but also your stance on Truvada, which is highly controversial. So I hear so many things about Truvada, and I think that the arguments around it are really polarized, and I like hearing all the different perspectives. So one, I'd like to hear about any kind of struggles that you had in that process, like as you came to terms with, I'm going to talk about this, and also I'll go into the second areas too around the discussions of the way people are using it in just a second. But.
Yeah, so I started being sexually active when I was 17 in 1987, and for people who remember back to 1987, it was we were at one of the worst parts of the AIDS epidemic. There was no effective treatment. There was so much fear and uncertainty. They had just discovered just before that how to even do an accurate HIV test. It was a really scary time period, and I'm from that generation that came of age and started being sexually active when you associated sex with getting sick and dying, and there's a lot of anxiety around sex, and every time you would have sex, you would think afterwards, oh my God, did I have a cut somewhere? Right. Did something that I didn't realize happened, and it was like this freak out, and that was a sort of a generational thing, and I get no effective treatment. So for me, that's what I came from as a young gay guy, and so to have not just all the advances with the meds, and so that you could have HIV and lead a really healthy and productive and great life, but to have a pill that you take once a day that almost completely eliminates your risk of HIV, that to me was just unbelievable. And if Truvada had been invented in the 1980s, people would be lined up around the corner waiting for it. And instead, it gets put out and immediately gets attacked. And all this sex shaming and slut shaming and judgment, stigma, when we should be embracing it. And the shaming that we see with Truvada is the same shaming that women get with the birth control pill. It's the same thing.
For sure.
Because, God forbid you should have sex.
Right. And
so for me, when I decided to go into Truvada, took me a while to get there, but I got there, and it's been a huge change in terms of the anxiety level and just feeling secure.
I totally understand that. Yeah. The thing, whenever I wasn't sexually active in the 80s, but when I was starting to experiment, when I was in the 90s, it was in my teens, I would do that. I would go home and pray. Even if I had done nothing really risky, I would, again, like you mentioned, the cuts, or be like, I have AIDS now, and I'd be praying, and I didn't, it was years before I actually got tested, years after I'd been active. And even then, even early 20s for me, I would have Listerine or something in my car, so that if I did something that I would I'd be afraid, this is going to actually help at this point, because it was so fear driven, and that was the association that I had every time I had a sexual act, and that was part of the reason why it was so hard for me to come out of the closet, I think, was because of all the fear. And you had mentioned in a piece that you wrote on medium.com about that, about working on the hotline and the fear and the stigma that was associated around that time. I wonder if you would share more about the work on the hotline. That seems to be a poignant.
Well, that was my first sort of entry into our community. It was, I went to Duke University in Durham, North Carolina. I graduated in 1992, so this was around 1990, 91 when I started coming out. I decided I wanted to be involved in the community, and so there was an HIV hotline that was right off the campus, and so I went and I decided to volunteer and went through a whole training around how to talk to people who are in crisis, around like resources and information you can provide to people, just trying to help people. And so then after the training, I volunteered, I think once or twice a week in the evening, just taking those calls and talking to people who were sometimes just wanting information, and sometimes really freaking out for the same reason that I would sometimes freak out inside, that, oh my God, I did X, Y, or Z, and I must have AIDS now. Taking those calls from people in North Carolina, sometimes in rural North Carolina, and places where there was even less support than I had, and so it was a really important experience for me as a newly out young gay guy to be talking to people like that and hearing what people were saying.
I mean, when you say they're freaking out, like, what was the emotional impact on you at the time? I mean, besides like your response to make action, what did that feel like? I mean, and when you say freaking out, can you give me an example of like what you deal with?
Yeah, it's 25 years ago, so I might I don't remember the exact words that people were saying, but people who the condom broke. The condom broke, and I don't know what to do, and I'm going to die now, and I'm going to kill myself. Or I have HIV, is a positive, and I don't know what I should say to my family. Those kinds of conversations that are they're heartbreaking. In addition to the ones where people are like, I made out with someone and I think I might have AIDS now. Those are the easy ones. We can sort of calm people down and say, trust me, you don't.
Right.
And here, we didn't even have a website you could go to them, because it was 1991. It was before, everyone had the internet, and so it was a different era.
Well, it's interesting. I was one of those people calling those lines back in the day. In my early 20s, I would call in and think like, hey, can you tell me the condom broke? Did it happen? Like, what wanting this person on the other end of the line to give me this sort of security around myself and to
just tell me I'm safe.
Fear. Yeah. So, I mean, that's the reason why I think that the Truvada debate is like extremely critical to have that out there. And the other side of the situation is often people say, it's not going to encourage people to be more risky. It's not going to encourage this. It's not going to encourage that. And the other part of me wants to look at that honestly, in even my own life. Like a few times, I've made unsafe choices based on the fact that I knew that there was Truvada involved. And I have friends that are therapists that work with couples who, like they have, open relationships, and now they have other things in the relationship between them that they didn't have before. And so it's a side of the discussion that I think is connected maybe to a bigger discussion as a society, like you brought up women and the shaming and sex and the shaming, and really why are we having sex? Sometimes is it sort of reaching out? Is it like just like a grab for like an emotional eating kind of situation, which often in those scenarios, I think you're more likely to make a choice that isn't like in your best health. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think, and it's interesting, you use the word, you made an unsafe choice because Truvada was involved, but, and that, for 30 years, it was about condoms, and still is. Condoms are still incredibly important for many, many people. And for 30 years, we said, use a condom, use a condom, use a condom, please use a condom. You have to use a condom, please use a condom. And 5 out of 6 gay men were not consistently using condoms throughout the whole epidemic, up until, before PrEP was approved for anything. And so, we had this situation where people were still seroconverting, people were not consistently using condoms. And the reality is that men, gay or straight, do not like condoms. People just don't. And so having a pill that reduces risk by upwards of 99% versus a condom that reduces risk by 70%, in terms of what's safe and not safe, they're both just different forms of safer sex.
Harms control in various vectors.
But the shaming is absolutely still there, and the judgment like, oh, you're not using a condom, that means you're reckless,
moralizing about it versus like looking at it as just like a statistical situation. Yeah, for sure.
And one of the reasons why I disclosed, and actually this month is 2 years since I announced that I'm on PrEP, which was scary. Almost all of my friends advised me against doing it. I did it because I thought it was important to try to elevate the issue and the discussion, and it was an overwhelmingly positive response. There were some people who sent me some very judgmental emails,
like
Facebook messages. Oh, you're setting the movement back. We worked so hard for all these years to create a condom culture, and you're helping to tear it down. And my response, of course, is like, that this condom culture was never as airtight as you might have thought it was. And so let's meet people where they are with this powerful prevention tool, rather than just demanding that they do what we want them to do. And so,
I think that might be actually all we have time for right now. Me here and with the public on my webcast, My Shameless Life. If you're watching today, please stay tuned. You can go to www.finndeerhart.com. That's FINNDEERHART.com for updates and to be abreast of what's happening with the agenda, and to see next month's episode of My Shameless Life, which will be coming out in October. And if you haven't done so already, please like us on Facebook. It is The Agenda SF. Go on there, like us. You'll also be able to get a coupon code for one of these t-shirts that's going to be for sale online very soon. Profits to be donated to the GSA network. And I look forward to seeing you next month.